Hello, and welcome to the Warm Line 2.0. I'm Jen Rude. I'm the university pastor at Pacific Lutheran University. And this show is part of a 5-week series of shows on the PLU Community YouTube channel as we move through the summer toward a fall semester unlike any other. So we continue to be steeped in COVID-19 and the brutality of systemic racism and a polarizing upcoming election. And on top of that, we certainly have our own personal or family stuff going on. It's a lot. So in this series, through a variety of shows, we're going to jump into the mess, and we're going to dive into a variety of relevant topics that we hope speak to these moments in particular. So on this particular show, we're going to be interacting with these topics from faith perspectives and with spiritual lenses. And today we're going to begin with the topic of rest. And I'm so excited today that we have my first guest, Kara Barkman. Kara, it's great to see you today. Thanks for doing this show.
Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, you bet. So Kara is a 2019 grad from PLU, and then she spent about 6 months after graduation with the Lutheran Church's Young Adults in Global Mission program in Mexico before being called back, like many others, in March because of the pandemic. And Kara is now back in Shelton, Washington. At PLU, Kara was super involved. She was part of the leadership team of University Congregation and the Interfaith Working Group, a new student orientation guide. I think you worked on a TV show, among many other things. And throughout my time knowing you, Kara, you've really struck me as a person who is so grounded and present, and you know how to rest and play. So you seemed like the perfect guest to have on the show as someone who I think has cultivated this sense of rhythm in life that includes rest. So I'm going to just start off with like a really broad question of what is rest for you and why do you think it's essential?
Yeah, so I think rest is important because busyness isn't sustainable. That's something I learned the really hard way in high school.
Yeah.
I was involved with so many things and I really pressured myself to like do as well as I could in school, and it was exhausting.
Mm-hmm.
So by the end of high school, I was really just so tired and I didn't know like what kinds of things I wanted to continue when I went off to college. So in college, what I really tried to work on was, yes, it's okay to be busy, but it's not okay to be so busy that I don't feel like I can continue, like that I don't have the energy to put everything into what I'm doing.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, for rest for me is anything from reading and taking a nap, like if I physically need to rest,
Yes.
to hiking with friends pre-pandemic or sitting in a coffee shop a few months ago, pre-pandemic, just talking with people, and maybe it was playing games during a game night. Sometimes, just watching a silly Netflix show or movie. So rest, it really depends on what I need to be resting from or what kind of rest I'm looking for.
It seems like you've been so intentional about it. Intentional about like weaving rest into your rhythm and your routine. And you mentioned several things like pre-pandemic. Remember we used to like sit in coffee shops with other people?
I loved it.
Have you found kind of new rhythms or new ways to rest in these particular moments?
It's been hard. It's been really hard because most of this pandemic, it's just sitting at home. Like even if you're working, most of the time it's working from home. So finding exactly right now. So finding a way to rest from all of that has been challenging. I've done a lot more reading, which I've always been a big reader, so that's been really good for me. Trying to balance books that have really important topics, especially right now with like books about anti-racism and like how can I actively be involved with that. And then silly rom-com books or fantasy novels that just kind of help me like have fun a little bit. And I've also been doing a lot of letter writing. So trying to stay connected with folks right now is really easy through social media and through video chats and phone calls, but sometimes just getting a letter in the mail is so exciting. So then trying
to do so fun because mostly you just get junk, right?
Yes. It's not a bill. It's not ads. It's a legit letter from someone, and I love that. So
Yeah.
yes, been trying to do some of that as well.
You mentioned kind of reading around anti-racism. Of course, like the Black Lives Matter movement is kind of surging again right now in really important ways. When we think about rest, it's not just like checking out or just kind of right. It's a rhythm of work and rest and sort of engagement and rest. So at this kind of particular moment in your life, like what is the work that you're engaged in? It could be paid or not paid, but
Yeah, so I do have a job. I'm working as a barista. I love coffee, so that's great.
perfect.
But also being engaged with, like you said, the Black Lives Matter movement is obviously really important right now, and it's always been very important, especially as white people, for us to be actively involved in anti-racism work. So what's been really good, I guess, is having time now to actually set aside moments where I can sit down and I can read, and then I can say, okay, here's what I've taken, here's what I'm really actively trying to learn from and listen to. Now, what are some actions I can take, even if it's from my house? So things like donating or really reading up on Black history, things that maybe you weren't taught in high school. I'm a big history person, but there's so much that's left out. So really taking time to do that work as well, because it's so important right now. There's also a really good book recommendation if
Let's hear it.
people have read Dear Church by Lenny
Yes.
Duncan. Yeah, especially if you are connected to the ELCA in some way, which is the denomination that PLU is affiliated with. It's a really important book that you can read, looking at a Black preacher's perspective, and it's a love letter to the whitest denomination in America. And so I read that with my YAGM cohort, and from there we had conversation, but then we also said, okay, what is the work that we can do even during this pandemic in our own churches? So what are the conversations we can start? Maybe we can start a book group. So that's some of the things that I've been trying to plan. So that's some of the work that currently
I'm glad you recommended that book too. We're going to read that with our University Congregation leadership team as a start this year, and maybe expand out of that.
Yeah.
And I was thinking too, I wonder like if in this moment of pandemic, because people were maybe resting a little bit more and a little bit more reflective, that actually we're more primed to engage in things like the Black Lives Matter movement, or doing our own education around history that we might have missed. Like we weren't maybe quite as fried, if we have the privilege of being employed and being safe and being healthy, that for some of us, this has actually given us more time to be activated in a good way. So yeah, kind
definitely
of a mixed thing. How is faith connected to rest for you?
Ooh. So I guess something I started to really learn about and kind of explore in college, and then also working at summer camp, is how holy rest is. We, especially at working at a summer camp, you're outside and you're learning about like the creation stories and how on the seventh day God rested. So in the Bible, like at the beginning of the Bible, rest is holy. So being able to find times to rest, again, whether that's like I just physically need to take a nap, or just resting your mind, or getting outside, however that may look, is very holy. It's very spiritual. I also think that rest goes against this go, go, go culture that we have in the US.
Yeah.
And it really kind of helps you make space for healing and for relationships. And to me, that is very holy. So that is where rest connects with my faith. So
I love how you brought up the creation story. And I've heard, I think it's Walter Brueggemann, who I'm going to offer a quote in a second, talks about like the fact that God rested on the seventh day, tells us that like God is not a workaholic.
Yeah.
And I just love that like God trusts that creation can keep on going without us, like you mentioned, that sort of go, go, go energy. Walter Brueggemann is a theologian who writes a lot about Sabbath, actually, and this rest as resistance. And And here's this quote that he says, the Sabbath rest of God is the acknowledgement that God and God's people in the world are not commodities to be dispatched for endless production as hands in the service of a command economy. And rather, he says, they are subjects situated in an economy of neighborliness. I wonder if you can talk a little bit about this economy of neighborliness as Sabbath. I'm thinking in particular about your time in Mexico, and I wonder if you learned anything there from the folks that you worked with about, the economy of neighborliness as Sabbath.
Yeah. Ooh. So I specifically was in a community in Mexico called Quetzalan. It's a small town in the Sierra Norte mountains of the state of Puebla. And I was living in Quetzalan with a host family, and I was working in a nearby community called San Miguel, and at a school called Tetzitzilin. So middle school, I was teaching English, and something I learned really, really quickly was how interdependent everyone is. It's very much a community-based town community rather than being so individual. And something that I'm learning a lot about the US is how individualistic we are. So being a part of a community really makes room for when you are, what am I trying to say here? There are times when you are in a huge group and you are really chatty with other people and you are engaging in conversations. And then there are other moments where you just sit together for a cup of coffee in the morning, and that's it. And that's how you are a part of community. And yes, it's literally just sitting there. And so in a way it is rest. For me, sitting somewhere in the morning, drinking a cup of coffee, looking outside, that is rest. So to do that with people around you, it felt like this way of kind of community, I don't want to say community rest, but it felt like a way of bonding with other people, but not having to exert a ridiculous amount of energy in order to do it.
You weren't trying to like produce anything by being together.
No,
we're just being together, which, I mean, Sabbath can include other people for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it was just a way of sitting together, drinking coffee, eating our pan dulce, and that was it. And that was okay. And that was a way to sit in friendship and to sit in community and build these relationships in a way that was so unique and not something you would really, I have ever experienced in the US. Whenever I sit down for coffee with other folks, it's, well, then how was your day? And you're chatting the entire time, which is great. And I love that. But it was so interesting to kind of be in that situation. But I also learned a lot about myself in terms of I thought I was always a super extroverted person. I am. I love to be around people. But also it is important sometimes to just be by yourself and take a step back, because it can be exhausting being around other folks. I was speaking Spanish all day, which is not my native language, and
tiring.
Was very tiring. And I was teaching over 150 students every day. So it was a really important lesson in where can I be present with other folks and when do I need to personally step back, and how can both of those spaces be places where I can find rest.
Yeah, you mentioned like being present for other people, and I think that's part of the rest, or this economy of neighborliness. I know when I'm like burnt out, maxed out, and somebody just wants to like stop by and connect, I feel exhausted and I don't feel like I have the energy to do that. But if I am like grounded and rested and centered, then I can see that person as neighbor, as like beloved of God, and I'm ready to sort of like engage them, like you talked about in the beginning, as a holy person.
If you're more rested, you're not, like, at least for me, if I'm more rested, I'm not going to be as grumpy when I'm encountering other folks. I'm going to be much more pleasant of a person. And a lot of times you're more patient if you're more rested, if you found that kind of grounding like you talked about. So you're able to exert a certain amount of energy in terms of being patient and listening to other folks, which, especially right now with all of the heated politics and everything going on, that's really important to be able to kind of patiently listen. Maybe you're going to be re-explaining things or having a teaching moment, which is great. But yeah, if because if you're grumpy and you're going into those conversations, there's not much productivity is going to come out of that.
Yeah. And what you just said kind of made me think about the fact that like we're in this for the long haul, right? Especially as like people of faith committed to justice work. Like we know that this is long haul work, and we need to sustain ourselves in order to not just tap out, right? But to stay connected with neighbor. So I wonder, like for you, like what is the long haul work that you feel connected to, or like how do you sort of see yourself sustaining for the long haul?
Yeah, I think right now what I'm learning is that a lot of this anti-racism work obviously is not a one and done experience. It's a journey, and it's continuous, and we will continue to learn no matter where we are in life. You're never going to know anything. And so I think for me, a lot of it is going to be actively reading and engaging in that material and with people. So I'm excited for one day when it's a lot easier to kind of be in larger groups again and able to hold kind of in-person discussions, because they're just not the same over Zoom. They're not the same. So, and along with that, working with organizations that I love, and specifically with the church, that's something that through YAGM was really exciting, working with other young adults who are actively involved in faith communities. Even at PLU, that was something that was very exciting. And how can we as a church body, or we as people of faith, engage in these issues as holy issues, as issues of faith, and how can we engage, and how can we continue to move forward and maybe push the church in a certain direction and really lead discussions in that. I think that's really important, and I'm really excited to be able to start to have those conversations with folks. I'm hoping that YAGM is a really good gateway for me personally, being able to talk about my time with YAGM, which will hopefully lead into some of those other discussions. So for me personally, that's what I hope kind of the long haul, at least as of this moment, will look like.
Yeah, that sounds good.
Yeah.
I'll be interested in kind of where you end up next. When you were talking, it made me think about our chapel theme for the fall is going to be love your neighbor, a call to action.
Ooh, I love that.
Like a lot of what you're talking about. Like how do we engage people and not just we need to do the self-learning, we need to do the education, and we need to act. Like people are dying. People need all of us on board. So I appreciate that. And as we think about like first year students who might be watching this as they're like about to start their college experience in this really new time, do you have any bits of advice or wisdom kind of related to spirituality and rest? Or
I think in general about rest, make sure that you can have fun with it. Like, remember that you can have fun as you rest. It doesn't always have to be about napping and reading a book and watching Netflix. Those things are great. They are. But sometimes that rest from your schoolwork means having a game night with friends. Sometimes that rest is sitting down in a coffee shop and just talking to someone instead of sitting down in a coffee shop to write a paper. Those are two very different things, even if they're at the same location. One is busy and the other one can be so fulfilling. I mean, like I said, as a camp, I talked about being a camp counselor, and on the weekends we would go hiking. And yes, we were already exhausted from a week of working with campers, but then on Saturday we would go on a hike anywhere from 3 to 15 miles. And the next day we would still be physically exhausted, but I was so spiritually and mentally renewed and ready for the next week. So have fun while you rest. Take a nap if you need to, but realize that finding good communities who are okay with just sitting in silence with you sometimes, or just playing a game and having fun. And don't forget that you're still able to have fun. You don't have to just be busy, work all the time, because that's not sustainable. And
and it's not who we were created to be, right?
No.
We were created in the rhythm of work and rest, and and that we don't need to do anything to kind of earn our space in God's love, right? That we are loved. And I think that gives us some permission too to just rest and be present. Yeah.
For sure. Definitely.
Thank you so much, Kara. It was so fun to talk to you and to see you. And I wish you well in your next adventure. Thanks for being on today.
Thanks for having me.
Bye.
Bye.